Now, welcome to Stowe Talks. Tonight's session is pretty cool, actually. I'm very excited about tonight. This evening, we're absolutely delighted to welcome a new face. He might not be new to you because you're joining this webinar for a reason, and it's probably because of Michael that you're here. Now, Michael Johnson-Ellis is with us tonight, and he is the founder, very busy man, the founder of TwoDadsUK. He also does the Modern Family Show, and he runs the surrogacy agency, My Surrogacy Journey. Okay, now Michael's story is fascinating, but I'm going to let him tell you about it in his own words, because he will obviously do far better than me trying to summarize everything that he's accomplished. Now, I do want to signpost you first of all to Michael's website, which is mysurrogacyjourney.com. I'm particularly impressed with Michael's website, and I think there's a huge amount of information on there, but it's also an information source that you can tell has been done with passion, but by someone with a huge amount of attention to detail. So for me and my lawyer brain, I love it. I think it's great. Details of the website and anything that we refer to will be coming out from Kate afterwards, after the session. So don't panic about writing anything down. We'll get all the information out to you. That's not a problem. Now, as I said, I'm happy about tonight's session. I do think it's a pretty cool topic. Now, surrogacy is awesome. There is no other way of talking about it. Most people will know, apart from the newcomers tonight, that I'm a divorce lawyer. So day in, day out, my working caseload can be quite challenging. I'm dealing with people who are having a pretty tough time and major life changes. Now, in my mind, as a divorce lawyer, I see surrogacy as the happier end of the spectrum, the family law spectrum. It's one area where we are adding, we're increasing the bodies under one roof rather than reducing them. So that, for me, is a really cool outcome. And it's a lovely change for me to learn more about something like this. This isn't my area of expertise, and tonight I'm pleased to have two partners in crime with me. I've got Liza Gatrell with me, and also Gemma Davison. Now, both are senior associates within this firm. Lisa's been she's been advising on surrogacy for, I think it's nearly 10 years now, and she can advise specifically regarding UK, but also international surrogacy agreements, which is pretty cool. Lisa can be found most of the time down in Winchester and Southampton. Gemma, on the other hand, is over in Reading. Gemma's been advising on surrogacy for over 8 years, but she also advises on what we call other pathways to parenthood. So donations, platonic co-parenting, single parenthood by choice. I feel some topics for future webinars coming up in there, Gemma, so don't run away. We'll be doing a few more of those, I think, as we go along throughout the year. Now, Gemma and Lisa run our surrogacy team here at Stowe Family Law, and they're your main contacts for legal questions. Their details will come out after the session, obviously, with the information that Kate's going to be sending out. Again, a big thank you to a lot of newcomers, I suspect, who will be new to Stowe Talks, and possibly Stowe Family Law as well. We are the largest family law firm in England and Wales, and we've been around for an awfully long time. Because we've been around for an awfully long time, along our way, we've picked up an awful lot of additional knowledge outside perhaps of our main core areas, but we've also met a lot of interesting people, Michael obviously included, and a lot of specialists and experts. And that's where this series of webinars has grown from. It's our way of doing something more than just a blog, although we do that very well as well. It's giving back a little bit. Anybody can join these webinars, whether you're a client, a future client, a law student, or somebody who's just supporting someone else who's having a really tough time. It doesn't matter. The subject matter varies from month to month, and the subject matter is driven by you guys attending these sessions and telling us what you want to hear. You will note, however, we're not broadcasters, we are lawyers. So if we are a little rough around the edges, please forgive us. Tonight's session, the format is straightforward. Michael's going to do a presentation, and then we've got Gemma and Lisa on hand to deal with questions as well. And of course, Michael will have some answers for questions as well. Housekeeping. It's a nice, friendly, safe space. Be nice to each other. As always, everybody always is, and I have to still say that. I'm terribly sorry. Please use the Q&A function on Zoom for asking the questions. Feel free to chat away in the chat box. We always get lots of chat, lots of love. That's great. We are recording tonight's session. And as I said, there will be a follow-up email with all the relevant details on. So if you missed something, don't panic. It should be in our follow-up email. And if you think we missed something, just get in touch, because all our details will be on there anyway. Okay. Just to give you some context as to why I'm so excited about this session, next month we're back to our normal subject matter, which will be dealing with the toxic ex-partner and post-separation abuse. So that's the 20th of July. I thought I'd get that in there before we started the presentation. Anyway, right, chaps. Michael, over to you.
Hi, everybody. What an intro, firstly. Thank you very, very much. Really pleased to be here. Great to be joined by so many people watching, whether you're new to surrogacy or whether this is a topic close to your heart too. Hopefully you'll enjoy what we're going to be talking about and going through. So as Sarah mentioned, any questions, feel free to raise that in the Q&A too, or in the chat. We'll all be picking those up as we go. So I'm going to have a presentation to show you. It isn't death by PowerPoint. It is a little bit more interactive. So let's share my screen and let's make a start with that for you. Then it'll all be clear who I am and what I do. So as mentioned, I'm Michael Johnson-Ellis. I'm a gay man and I'm married to a guy called Wes. We've been together for 10 years. We met at Birmingham Pride in June 2012. And since then, we've been very, very busy growing our family and launching a few organisations to help people on a journey to parenthood, because that's been where our passion has been. But that passion began after our own journey, and our journey didn't necessarily go according to plan. It wasn't necessarily a gruesome story, but being two men, having children in a very heteronormative environment, we had some obstacles along the way that we had to overcome. And we'll talk about those in a minute. But let me just give you a bit more background to who TwoDadsUK are. So we're the Johnson-Ellis family. We have two children together, Tallulah, who's 5, and Duke, he's 2. And I'm genetically linked to our daughter, Tallulah, and my husband is genetically linked to our son, Duke. And my husband, Wes, also has an 18-year-old daughter, and her name's Katie, and she's there in your screen top right. So why did we establish TwoDadsUK, and what's it all about? We do all the work that sits outside of the LGBTQ spectrum and arena, but you can also hear more about that shortly when I talk about my surrogacy journey. But we wanted to do things like what I'm doing today. That's destigmatize the topic of surrogacy and help usualize same-sex parenting. And I tend not to use the word normalize anymore, because it kind of lets people think that we weren't normal to begin with. So we're usualizing the topic. And that's by being more front and center, showing that we're just parents parenting and no different. As I've mentioned, or as it was mentioned, we founded TwoDadsUK, and we've also founders and we run the Modern Family Show, which is the only LGBTQ family building event or expo that takes place in London, in San Francisco, and in Sydney, Australia. So we do 3 of those shows a year, and they're there to signpost and support people on a family building journey, whether it's adoption through to co-parenting, surrogacy, shared motherhood, IVF, IUI, trans fertility preservation, whatever it might be. We've brought all of those allies under one roof to help support that community. And then we have the non-profit surrogacy organisation, My Surrogacy Journey, which is now signposted by the HFEA, which is the fertility regulator, and CAFCAS, and also gov.uk as being one of the 4 recommended surrogacy organisations in the UK. As obviously from a disclosure point of view, I do run and I'm a co-founder of that organisation. The other organisations that exist for transparency and to help signpost, you have Surrogacy UK, Brilliant Beginnings, and COTS. So there are 3 other organisations that you can turn to for surrogacy support as well. And TwoDadsUK is primarily an organisation which signposts for free information related to surrogacy. Whether you're 2 men or anyone exploring surrogacy, my door's always open to help signpost that information too. We went through our journey, as I mentioned, with a few bumps in the road, which we'll talk about in our history to parenthood in a moment. But one of the objectives that we do through our organisation is that we support healthcare professionals. And I got that bug from when we were asked to co-write and co-author the Department of Health guidance for healthcare professionals for NHS England, when it came to the 2018 update of the code within the department, certainly looking at how surrogacy is communicated to and how other healthcare professionals are educated about the topic. So that was when I first realised that I was certainly enjoying doing more work in that space. We've also driven change within NHS policy, fertility regulators, and we work quite closely with the Law Commission and the All-Party Parliamentary Group related to surrogacy law, and we'll be talking about that topic a bit later on. But more importantly, for me, it's just making sure that families like mine are really visible, that my children can go to school, and when they are old enough to talk to their peers more, that our children aren't singled out as that girl with the 2 dads. I just want them to be proud of the work that we do, like any other child is of their own parents. So you can clearly see who me and Wes are, and then our gorgeous tour at the bottom, and then Katie is at the top. What I want to do, we're going to open with a statistic, and then I'm going to jump into our history. So a really cool stat that I love telling people about is this one here, and this is from the Family Equality Council, and that is that 77% of LGBTQ plus people between the ages of 18 and 35 are either already parents or are considering having children. And that's a huge increase over their elders, and that would be my generation, the increase over. And what's even more interesting when you dig into this stat is that this generation, so the generation, the millennials and the Generation Z that are coming through, are turning to reproductive medicine more as a way to family build, whereas the elders were more looking at adoption and fostering. And that's for 2 reasons. One, more people are talking about it, which is brilliant. The law has changed, which allows us to navigate our way through that pathway if we choose to. But also, fertility clinics are thankfully more open to treating people like me and my community. And that wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago. So that's why there's such an increase in people moving to that way, to family build. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my history to parenthood now. And there is a trigger warning in this because there are 2 birth images. I think they're beautiful images, but they are birth images with our surrogate. So as I mentioned, we met back in June 2012 at Birmingham Pride, and I was newly single, and I wanted to go to Pride to have lots of fun, kiss lots of boys, and to be single and mingle with lots of new people. And the first boy that I bump into in a bar was my now husband, which was meant to be. We got separated in a crowd, and I ended up finding him at the end of the day, walking back through the same turnstile. So it was meant to be, and we were together ever since. We got engaged fairly quickly in the November. And then we started having the conversation about what would family look like. And Wes is an incredible dad, and I was experiencing that blended family already. So I was learning how challenging parenting can be, but also how fun it can be too. For me, surrogacy was always the way I wanted to family build. I never considered adoption, which is often the first thing people say to a gay person is, why don't you adopt? And my response is, have you adopted? Because I don't necessarily think adoption is reserved for one member of a community or sexual orientation. I wanted a genetic link to a child, and I wanted to experience what that journey was like. I later discovered that genetics are actually less important when you're having a family. But certainly for me, that was why I wanted to build a family that way. So we began researching surrogacy, and you will see that Tallulah was born in 2016 and we started researching in 2013. And that's because if you Google surrogacy, it's quite alarming. It can be quite frightening. It can be very off-putting. More often than not, you're down a rabbit hole, and before you know it, you're looking at cat memes for some weird reason, because you just get lost in the internet. And we definitely felt that. Back in 2013, we were looking at Mexico, the US, Canada. We looked at Cyprus, we looked at Thailand, we looked at India, we looked at Cambodia, we looked at South Africa. And all of these countries either didn't feel right to us or we couldn't afford at that time. But again, one by one, each of those locations were either no longer suitable for gay people or people wanting to do international surrogacy. So it left only a few options, and that was really the US and Canada and the UK. We then decided on the UK, and that was because we wanted to be really present in our pregnancy, and we really wanted to be supporting our surrogate and be there at all the milestones, be at every scan, be at every appointment, and be present. So that journey began researching, and we decided in December 2014 that the UK surrogacy was our route. So we approached the 3 nonprofits that existed then, but none of them were accepting new intended parents because of a shortage of surrogates. So in 2014, all of their books were closed, a little bit similar to how the market is at the moment. But we then decided to do independent surrogacy. And independent surrogacy was something we knew nothing about, and there was very little support for that. We were told what groups and what Facebook groups and what forums to join, and we just were let wild, and we had to go and navigate our way. We had to find our own lawyer, find a clinic, make sure that one that was LGBT friendly. And then there's the challenge of finding a surrogate, and how do you even do that safely and legally? So all through that journey, we were on the independent route. And then in February, in 2015, Caroline, who carried both of our children, contacted me and said that she would love to be our surrogate. And she didn't want to have a genetic link, so she wanted to be a gestational carrier. And she wanted to do this for 2 men. She had 4 children of her own. And then we began what's known as a getting to know. And we spent a good 9 months ensuring that relationship was really tight, because as you'll learn, surrogacy in the UK in particular is built on trust and friendship because of the situation with the law. So that relationship just continued to build and to blossom. And then in the summer of 2015, our clinic found us an egg donor, and we matched that donor to Wes. We matched them to his characteristics because we were using my gametes. So they found us a blonde, blue, fair donor, and those eggs were retrieved in the February of 2016, and they were fertilized at the same time by my sperm. And that embryo was transferred fresh, which is unusual nowadays, but we did a fresh embryo transfer on the 13th of February 2016, and that resulted in the birth of Tallulah on the 16th of October 2016. Screaming and incredibly chunky and just scrumptious. Tallulah was, and her pregnancy, and Caroline was perfect. It was an absolute breeze for her. She loved being pregnant, but it was very quick from the get-go that once we went in for our 12-week scan, that firstly the NHS Trust knew nothing about surrogacy and were afraid of it. And every appointment we went to, terms like only the real dad is allowed for this scan, only the real dad can come to this appointment, only the real dad can wait here, or sometimes it was they only wanted to talk to Caroline first, and that was a bit of an obstacle. So that prompted us to want to do more work with the NHS, to do more education work and training, and that was the start of how TwoDadsUK was formed. And shortly after the birth of Tallulah, we registered TwoDadsUK Limited as an organisation. Surrogacy then began to change my life. Not only was I a dad through surrogacy, I had a real passion for it, and we were supporting tens of hundreds of couples and have supported 327 men to date become parents through surrogacy since 2016. And I decided that I wanted to completely change my career and just focus and work in the surrogacy space. And that's now what I do. But we wanted more children. So this time we were using Wes's gametes, and we had to find a new egg donor because we had issues with our previous donor, unfortunately. So we made mistakes along our way. And what we like to educate people about is when you are creating embryos, if you are using two sets of genetic material, please try and create them at the same time, because our donor unfortunately got very, very sick in between her donation with us. And that meant that she couldn't redonate again. So our children don't have a genetic link, which for us at the beginning, we were devastated about. But now, after the birth of our second child, I then discovered that genetics really is irrelevant. And whether you're approaching surrogacy from a sperm or an egg donation perspective, or even a double donation perspective, that child is still loved, is still yours, and feels no different than a biological child. And I have two, so I know the difference, and there is no difference there. But that transfer failed in 2018, and we had a devastating loss of all 12 embryos. So we had to start a brand new treatment cycle with another donor. And at that point, a friend came forward, and she was a fertility nurse, and she donated her eggs to us. She also matched the profile of what we wanted. And we did a transfer in December 2018, and that resulted in the birth of Duke on the 20th of August 2019. In between that, we launched some educational events that we run every year, which is Your Route to Parenthood as well. And that was the year for us when our work really began to peak. Next is an image of Duke. He's not very happy in this image, so he's fuming that he has just been born, bless him, and there he is. So that's Caroline, who was our surrogate, and again, Duke was also born by a cesarean section. That then moves on really, as I close our journey, just talk about the other work that we do, and we've mentioned already, and that is the fact that we've gone into partnership with IVF Babel. We've launched Babel LGBTQ with them. We've launched the Modern Family Show. The next show takes place on the 10th of September in London. And then we've got My Surrogacy Journey, and you can find more details about that at mysurrogacyjourney.com. One of the points that I wanted to do a nice segue to, which I think is a really lovely point for discussion next, will be the UK law. And for those of you that are familiar with surrogacy will know this already, but this is where what surrogacy is all underpinned by, and we're going to be talking about that next. So the Surrogacy Arrangements Act of 1985 and the Human Fertilization Embryology Act 1991 and 2008 are the pieces of legislation that we're going to be talking about. I'll hand over to, I believe, Liza, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, so we're going to try and keep the legal side of it fairly short, quick. I'm not going to go through all the details of all the acts with you. You know, it's late. I don't want to be putting anybody to sleep. But the surrogacy law, unfortunately, in the UK, it's not fit for purpose. And that's one of the problems that we have at the moment. There are reforms, and I'll talk very briefly about those in a second. But the main thing to say is that with the surrogacy laws that we've got at the moment, the surrogate is always recognised as the legal mother of the child under UK law. Who is then recognised as the second parent depends on whether or not the surrogate is married. So if the surrogate is married or in a civil partnership, then her spouse will be that child's father or second legal parent. If she's not married, then there's the opportunity for the biological father to be named as a second legal parent. Or if you're going through a fertility clinic, there are options there as to who you nominate. So it's really important that you're aware of all the options right from the beginning, so you can make those right choices. The important thing to say is at the moment, you know, once the child is born, obviously nobody going into a surrogacy arrangement. That's not the intention. The intention isn't the surrogate's going to be the mother. The intention is always that the intended parents will be the legal parents. So what we have to do then is, unfortunately, post-birth, fix that situation. And that's where an application for a parental order comes in. So a parental order is the order that rectifies that situation post-birth. There is a list of criteria that you need to comply with to be able to obtain a parental order. And I'll just run through it really briefly. I'm not going to go into any huge detail. Obviously, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat box or contact me afterwards. Happy to go into it further. So the main criteria then is that the child must have been carried by a woman who is not one of the intended parents. Conception must have taken place via artificial insemination. The gametes of the intended parents, or at least one of the intended parents, must have been used. So we can't have double donation for a surrogacy arrangement to apply if you're intending to apply for a parental order. The intended parents must be married in a civil partnership, an enduring family relationship, or since 2019, you can have a single applicant, which was a change that was brought in. It must be made within 6 months. The application must be made within 6 months of the child's birth. The intended parents must be over the age of 18. And then we get, so those are the more simple criteria, and then we get into the slightly more tricky ones. So you must be domiciled in the UK, the Channel Islands, or the Isle of Man. The surrogate and her spouse must have freely consented, understanding what's involved, and that consent must be unconditional. The court must be satisfied that no money has been paid other than for reasonable expenses or authorised by the court. And that can be quite a tricky one, particularly where we're looking at international cases, because in international cases, if you're going to a country like the US, for example, it's not the case that there's just reasonable expenses. There are often payments made to the surrogate. So in those cases, we have to get those authorised by the court. So the payments can be quite varied in that respect. And then ultimately, as with all family proceedings, the court must be satisfied that the parental order is in the best interests of the child. So how do you go about making an application? You fill out the C51 form and you send it to your local family court or high court if it's an international surrogacy case. Usually takes about 6 to 12 months for these applications to be processed and dealt with. During the course of the proceedings, you're going to have to prepare quite a detailed statement for the court, just running through that criteria and making sure that you can evidence to the court that you can effectively tick all of those boxes. You are likely to meet with a CAFCAS officer or parental order reporting officer who will be assigned to your case and will want to meet you. They'll often want to meet you with baby. They'll come to your house. It's not something necessarily that you need to worry about, but it is part of the process. And you will ultimately have 1 or 2 hearings. As Sarah alluded to at the beginning, what's often nice about these types of cases is that the final hearing can often be quite a celebratory hearing. And certainly pre-COVID, judge would often dress up in their robes. There might be pictures, etc., that can be taken. So you know they are the happier hearings that we do deal with within family proceedings. So that's a brief whistle-stop tour of parental orders. We have got reforms that have been in the works. They've been in the works since 2017, which is when the Law Commission's Surrogacy Reform Project was first announced. We had a consultation paper that was published in 2019, and we're expecting the final report on the draft bill at the end of this year, around about autumn time. And what that's proposing is a new pathway for surrogacy. So what it won't do is it won't replace the existing pathway. That will still be available. So you'll still be able to apply for a parental order in certain circumstances, in particular in relation to international arrangements. But there will be a new pathway where there'll be a number of steps that can be followed pre-conception. And if those steps are followed, then the intended parents will be recognised as the child's legal parents from birth. So that's a huge shift and update in the law that will hopefully be coming into place soon. So the types of steps that we're looking at for that new pathway are that you're working with a regulated surrogacy organisation or licensed clinic, that there are medical and criminal record checks, that there's independent legal advice, that you get implication counselling, that there's a written agreement, and that there's assessment of the welfare of the child. So but that will then allow you to not have to go through that parental order process post birth. You know, from the child's birth, you will then be recognised as the legal parents.
Lisa, the reforms and obviously the changes that we're hoping are going to happen, is it a given that they're going to happen? or is it still something to be debated?
It will have to go through the usual process of being debated. So it's the draft bill that we're hoping to get at the end of this year, and then it will have to go through the formal process, a bit like we had with the recent divorce bill. You know, it has to go through the various houses and then the rest of it.
Which again, I suppose, got delayed because of COVID. So actually, these reforms could have happened much quicker had we not had the pandemic, couldn't they?
Yeah, and we had a change of government and a change of prime minister. This has been, as we know, the consultation, whilst it started in 2017, was still being discussed by the all-party parliamentary group, you know, a couple of years before that. So it's been a long time coming. But yeah, the latest from the Law Commission is the autumn. So fingers crossed that deadline's met.
Awesome, great. That's really interesting. Perhaps we should pick up with another one of these later on when the procedure changes, actually, just to refresh everyone's memories, or at least let them know what the new process is. That'd be really cool. I'm going to ask a quite a simplistic question now. Lisa, what do you like best about doing surrogacy work?
I mean, you know, it's part of my practice, so I still do divorce and children's work, etc. But as I think, you know, you alluded to at the beginning, it's so lovely to be involved in building a family rather than dealing with how we're going to separate things post-separation. So it is just, I mean, and there are complications, you know, I can't say that everything is absolutely rosy. You know, there are lots of issues sometimes that we deal with, but in the whole, it's a much more positive area to be dealing with.
Michael, do you have a lot of people contacting you because they're having difficulties with the legal process, or they find that their lawyers are insensitive, or that things could be much improved?
Yeah, we have a number of people that come to us, particularly from a TwoDadsUK point of view. It's signposting, so it's making sure that I've always been a believer of making sure everyone gets legal advice, and a lot of people in the surrogacy community, again, don't know what they don't know. And as you'll know, the people that spend more money on lawyers are the ones that come to you when things have already gone wrong and it's a case of piecing it together. Whereas if that consultation would have happened in the beginning, either those flags would have been spotted, or you could have, you know, gone onto that pathway a lot easier. So we always recommend getting legal advice from the get-go, and that's working with a team that have an experienced surrogacy team, and then the second part is then the finding a clinic that has an experienced surrogacy program. And I think the two are just as important, because I think that the two are going to have to work together very closely in the new world, because that legal advice in most clinics now, they're asking for that as standard now. In UK clinics, especially all of the good ones that we work with do. So I think it's becoming the norm already, but choosing that right lawyer is really important, because there's a huge scale of cost from reasonable to extortionate, and my job is to try and help people navigate that and explain the differences between the two ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely. You've got to trust your lawyer. You've got to like them. You're introducing a stranger into your life, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's very personal, and you've got to have faith that obviously they can do the work. That's a given the majority of the time. But also you're getting value for money, and also that they're doing the best to move things along as quickly as they can for you, because the delays are built in. You don't need any extra delays, crikey, do you?
Yeah. Indeed.
I love, Lisa, what you were saying earlier about the last hearing being celebratory. That's pretty cool.
And that's really true. It's, you know, we didn't take our child with us. Tallulah didn't come to the first hearing or the second hearing. We didn't know if it was going to be suitable or not. Our lawyer came with us. But then the magistrate was wanting to know where the kids, or where Tallulah was, because they had a bag of gifts for her, and they really look forward to these types of presentations, almost because of the fact that it's certainly more joyful than the stuff they deal with on a daily basis. So the next time we went, we made sure that Duke and Tallulah came, and we had a really lovely photograph behind the bench, and it was a really good moment.
Oh, that's great. You forget that magistrates and judges need the happier spectrum of family law as well, don't you? Mm-hmm. We do tend to assume that they are slightly aliens sitting behind that big bench sometimes, don't we?
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions for you, Michael, if that's all right. If I'm being too nosy, just please stop me, but I find this area absolutely fascinating. Now, Tallulah and Duke obviously are still really young. Are they aware of their roots into the world?
Absolutely. Tallulah more so. She's a bright little girl, and she knows that Caroline grew her in a tummy because Dad and Daddy don't have all of the parts to make a baby. So she knows that another special person donated an egg. And she started asking questions about which daddy does she get her eyes from, and which daddy does she get her mouth from. So she's asking questions about that, and we're not making a big deal about that element because it's not a big conversation. So when it's appropriate, that will just happen naturally. But Tallulah knows that Caroline grew her and Duke, and that she knows that she has a surrogate, and she also understands that she hasn't got a mom and will never have a mommy. And that was a tricky question for Tallulah, because she immediately thought she wouldn't be a mommy because she didn't have one. So we took it a step back and we explained it a bit more, and we found that the Donor Conception Network do a really good book about talking and telling. And so DCN Network have this great resource for donor conceived children and families. So that they were a great help in terms of some of their books. Duke knows that he grew in Caroline's tummy, but that's kind of all he's grasped. He's far more interested in playing with diggers at the minute. But he gets a bit of a flavour for it.
Oh, that's really cool. And a bit about Caroline, really. What's your relationship with, what's your relationship like with her now?
It's the same as what it was when we were on the journey. You know, I had a WhatsApp message from her yesterday. We've still got the same WhatsApp group. We meet up every 2-3 months. We see her at birthdays and Christmases. It's birthdays, it's Christmases and birthdays, especially when the kids see them. But we'll do like a safari park trip or a day out somewhere, sort of 3-4 times a year. And that was the relationship that we both wanted. You know, we didn't want anything that felt transactional, but that's fine if you do. And she didn't want to be an auntie or, you know, be called a mummy or a mother or any description. She wanted to be our children's surrogate. And that's how she's explained. You know, she's someone very special to the kids and to us. We adore her and love her and her husband. And the relationship is just as good as what it was when we first created the kids. We're in the process of talking about having a third. Sadly, Caroline can't carry anymore because she's had 2 cesareans, and she can't be signed off, and we wouldn't want that level of risk. So we've had that conversation as well, and that was an interesting chat as well, because she's been with us at the beginning of the journey, and she's a bit gutted because she wanted to complete that. So that's kind of where that journey and relationship's at. But it's a great one. She's an incredible human. And I think all surrogates are that do this. I think they put themselves through what they do and create another family and change the world a little bit. It's just incredible. That's why I love what I do.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. Absolutely remarkable. I bet she's a remarkable woman, actually.
Yeah, she's
Caroline. Cool. Circling it round a little bit, Gemma, I know that you do, I'm taking it away slightly from surrogacy here. You advise on people's options other than just surrogacy in terms of different pathways for parenthood. And I know you also advise on the sperm and the egg donation side of things. Do you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes, I think it reflects the fact that we're in a position now where science and society means that we can look at a wide range of options for people starting a family. As Michael showed with his statistic earlier and explained the context to that, I think it's important for people to be aware that they do have many options for starting their family. And quite often the beginning for us is to talk them through about what is important. Michael referred to, is genetics important to you or isn't it? What have been the barriers and the difficulties that people have experienced when looking at starting a family? So sometimes it's about people contacting us and really saying, look, I want to start a family, but I don't know the best way for me because I don't understand all the legal consequences of if I do it this way or that way. And the law is quite complex when it comes to that, particularly looking at how and where a child is conceived. So yes, there's a wide range of options for people to consider and for us to support them through that journey.
Absolutely. It's I think meeting a lawyer for the first time in whatever aspect that you need a lawyer for is overwhelming, isn't it? We're a friendly bunch. I'm slightly biased, obviously. But I do think we try and make it as easy as we can for people who are crossing our threshold for the first time. I think we've got responsibility as lawyers to educate people in a friendly, nice way and make people know that we are available to help and assist and give guidance where possible. I think people should be encouraged to do the beauty parade. I suppose it's an old phrase, that really, but meet lots of lawyers, see who clicks for them. We're all different, hugely different, and it's the same whether you're looking for a divorce lawyer or a lawyer to help you through with these orders for surrogacy, or whether you're looking at adoption, whatever. You're telling them quite personal information, and you need to be sure that they're there, that they're available, that they're not too busy, that the right price point, etc., things like that. It's fascinating stuff. And it's not a journey, I think, that should be rushed. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yes. And it's a journey that we're on together for a long time. We meet people who are, like I say, considering their options first and foremost. And if they then embark on surrogacy, we've got a minimum of a 9-month wait until hopefully a healthy baby arrives. And then through the application for parental orders, as Lisa said, can take 6 to 12 months. So it needs to be the right lawyer because it's a journey that takes time and is a very close relationship.
And returning business, because frequently it's not just the one, is it?
Absolutely.
Oh, we could have lots of stay babies, couldn't we? That's really cool. Right. I'm just looking at some questions here. Do we have any questions in the Q&A section?
We have, yes.
Yes, interestingly. Let's take this last one first, because I think it's a fascinating one. Michael, is it always a C-section for surrogacy, or can there be a natural birth?
No. It's whatever is the surrogate's choice. It's obviously her body, and depending on previous pregnancies or what she wants or what's advised medically is how it goes. Now, it can be slightly different in the US, but certainly if I'm talking purely from a UK perspective, no, it's very much split evenly. In fact, our surrogate had 4 episiotomies, so couldn't have a natural birth, so had to have an abdominal birth, hence why Tululu and Duke were both planned C-sections.
Okay. Right. I presume the amount of C-sections do affect the surrogate being able to carry more children in the future, like Caroline. Is that right?
Yeah. So, for example, at my surrogacy journey, if you've had more than 2 cesarean sections, then you can't be a surrogate. Our surrogate as well, she had also had a hernia on her scar, which was an added complication. But generally, from what I know of all the surrogacy organisations in the UK, if you've had more than 2 C-sections, then you can't be a surrogate. It medically would be quite dangerous for the baby and for the surrogate. But yeah, that's the general ruling from a surrogacy organisation point of view.
Okay, That's interesting. We're going to change a little bit of direction now, and I want to talk a bit more about the nitty gritty, and that's financing all this, the cost. So we have a question in terms of what is the total financial cost involved from day one of planning to the baby coming home once all the forms and the order's been achieved. And quite rightly, the person asking the question has pointed out that you can Google this, but you never get a clear-cut answer.
No.
And obviously the figures that are bandied around are really quite daunting. Michael, I'll leave that one with you to start with, and then we might go on to Lisa, if that's all right.
Of course.
You might have opinions.
Yeah, I think firstly, it would depend on the type of surrogacy that you're doing, whether you're doing traditional surrogacy, which is usually home insemination, which is obviously much cheaper because there's no IVF or no cost for donor eggs, for example. So that's the cheaper end of the scale and more affordable. And that for that journey, the main cost that you would have would be your surrogate's expenses and some potential legal costs as well. So there's the dog. So what I would suggest, or what we'd like to give people as an estimate for traditional surrogacy is anything from zero, because it has been known, to around about £16,000-16,000 for a traditional journey. If you're doing a gestational journey, it's more expensive because you will have the cost of IVF, you will have the cost of donor eggs, all of your blood tests, which are expensive, and then your standard legals, wills, life insurances, everything else that you're going to need. And if you're using an organisation to help you, then there's the cost of their membership too, and their membership can range from £1,500 to, I think the most expensive is now £30,000 just for membership. The more average at that scale for membership of surrogacy organisations is anything from £5,000 to £8,000.
Is there anything regulating that, or can organisations just charge what they want?
No, there isn't anything regulating that at the moment. Now, the proposed RSOs, registered surrogacy organisations, under the new pathway will be regulated by the HFEA. So that's already in the proposed change, and the HFEA recently spoke at one of our events with the Law Commission talking about how the dual relationship will work, which was quite fascinating to understand actually. So gestational surrogacy, you need to budget anything up to £50,000 in the UK. IVF with donor eggs for surrogacy in the UK for two people providing their own gametes. So if that's a gay man, both want to fertilize eggs, you are looking at around about £20,000 to £23,000 to do that whole process. And then on top of that will be your surrogate's expenses. And they can be anything, like I've said before, from very, very low. I would probably say realistically £8,000. And we've seen surrogates' expenses be £25,000, £26,000, £27,000, but the average is around about £15,000 to £18,000 at the moment. But again, that's not regulated. It's very grey what is reasonable expenses. So there's more work to be done on that particular topic in the reform. And I'd imagine that's the bit that everyone's scratching their head with at the most, because that's quite a challenging area to finalize. But yeah, so I would say a traditional journey around about £15,000, and a gestational journey up to £50,000. But our first journey for Tallulah cost us £34,000, and then for Duke it was £38,000. We didn't use an organisation. We wanted to, and I wish we had, because we made a ton of mistakes. We didn't get everything right. But we had a lawyer as well. So we made sure that our lawyer did our parental order, even though it was in the UK, because we were busy with our children. We just didn't want to screw up the forms. So we had all of that managed for us. And we had that for both of our children because we saw the value in it.
Wow. Okay, it's kind of triggered my brain a little bit in terms of thinking about areas where people can be taken advantage of in this situation. They want to go down that journey so badly.
You absolutely see it. You see it, the exploitation. I see it daily, from organisations, from the odd clinic, from international surrogacy agencies, countries which are less regulated, and they prey on very vulnerable, desperate people. And surrogacy, we quite often, and rightly so, protect the surrogates and the welfare of the child. But we also need to be very aware that these intended parents are often very vulnerable too. And I'm managing several cases at the minute where we have 3 sets of IPs that have spent over £100,000 each on international and UK journeys where they were scammed out of money, and because they were an easy target for someone. So that's why, signposting credible resources for me is something I take really, really passionately and sensibly.
So Lisa, with your international work, have you come across these situations before where people have been scammed for money or led astray?
Not specifically scammed for money, but obviously the figures, and I think it's very difficult, particularly where you've got language barriers and things like that in place as well. If we're looking at particularly European countries, it can be very difficult because there may not be any contacts with the surrogate. The surrogate may not speak English. So there are all sorts of barriers that come in place. So they have to, in some respects, put their faith in these clinics and these organisations that they're going to abroad, and that's where I think the research really comes into it, and talking to other people that have ideally used those clinics, and making sure that you do all that front-loaded research if that's a route that you're going down.
Is there any financial help available in the UK for if you are wanting to start this journey but you don't have the resources to do so? Are people just forced to rely on raising a personal loan or mortgage or credit card? Or
I think it depends on the journey, because obviously from a surrogacy point of view there is no funding available. From an NHS point of view, there's been one case in NHS Scotland, and there's been an NHS Wales case, but not in England certainly. Most people either save very hard or borrow or remortgage, especially if you're doing a US journey where you need often $150,000 to $180,000 to do that journey. There are companies on the horizon that are helping. There's a very active fertility benefit provider called Carrot, who provide excellent fertility benefits for organisations. We're a Carrot partner. We're the only surrogacy organisation that's a Carrot partner, and we get a number of intended parents through that route that get a fertility benefit. So some of their employers may have a fertility benefit of up to £60,000, for example. So they then take that fertility benefit through Carrot. There are similar organisations that exist. There is another organisation that's doing research with TwoDadsUK at the moment. Their name's Radish. And I don't know what the obsession is with vegetables.
It's a bit of a vegetable theme.
I know. But Radish are specifically working with the LGBTQ plus community, and it is a lending circle. So that's something that is very, very early stages, and we've been doing our research and questionnaires with them. But apart from that, no, we do have a product. So we have something called Hatchling Fertility Finance, and that is a secured loan. That's through My Surrogacy Journey. You don't have to be a member, but there's an application process, and that's underwritten by one of the biggest Northwest lenders, and it can be for family building purposes. And that got complete sign off from the FCA. Because previously there had never been an application for lending for family building. You can't for surrogacy because you can't profit through that route, because it will loop back round to the Act. without going into too much detail, but certainly family building is a way to borrow, and that's for a US or a UK journey. So there are some products available, but you really do have to look really hard because they're few and far between, unfortunately, which is a real shame. Or you've got part of your treatment through someone like Access Fertility, which are a fertility, almost like a fertility insurance. That's also someone that a lot of the fertility clinics work with, and that's Access Fertility. Again, it's like an insurance product, but it won't cover the cost of your surrogacy, your surrogate's fees, your surrogate expenses, or your fees in the US.
Okay. Wow, that's really interesting. There was loads of information there, Kate. I'm not quite sure if we grabbed it all. But I thought, oh, you've got it. Brilliant. Lovely. Good. Right. I'm just checking if we've got any more questions, really. Yes, there's Kate getting all the information. It's in the chat box, chaps, if you're looking for it. Now, one of the things I was going to ask Michael really was, you mentioned, obviously, with hindsight, maybe you would have used an organisation when you started out with on Tallulah's journey. Is there anything else you would have done differently?
Yeah, I think we would have. It's hard to say I would have created our embryos all in one go, because I then feel really sad that would then completely, eradicate and remove Duke from the equation. But I think my advice would be, because the heartache at the time and the stress at the time with what we spent looking for other donors, if you can and you are looking to do a sibling journey, create those embryos all in one go if you can. And that may mean a second round of egg retrieval to get those embryos created. But that would be one of the things that I would say. The other is to enjoy the journey. We were so stressed and so obsessed over certain elements. Having professionals manage certain elements of it really takes the weight off. And I would really encourage you to find that friend in your lawyer or your fertility nurse or your doctor, because everyone is championing for this to work. It's one of the few things that everyone wants this to end a certain way. So, find your crowd and build your tribe and make sure that you've got all of that scaffolding around you that you really need, because you absolutely need it, because it's called a journey for a reason, because the average surrogacy journey in the UK is about 3 years long. And you've got a very angry dog.
Something about a journey. They decided they want to go for a walk.
I won't say that word.
Michael, that's absolutely fascinating. I'm really grateful that you've shared so much with us, and openly as well. I love it. Lisa and Gemma, do you have any questions for Michael yourselves while you're on here? Now we've got him captive for a short period of time longer.
I think the only question I would have, I suppose, is that, you've been involved a lot with the NHS and the changes that they've made. I mean, are there any other changes that you would be looking for them to make that you haven't quite been able to push through to assist intended parents going through all these journeys? Or are you happy that the changes that have been made recently have bridged that gap from, how they were dealing with it to how they're dealing with it now?
There's still more to do, unfortunately. We did a big freedom of information request back in 2020 of every single maternity services trust or trust with maternity services. And the findings, or what we wanted to establish, were when did they update their surrogacy policy? Because the view was that it should be when the recent update came out in 2019. But less than 10% of trusts, of the 134 that we sampled, had updated a policy. So we emailed them all and gave them all a period of time to update. And then we would proceed with a full judicial review. And 97% of trusts now have a policy that's reflective of the guidance. We're still working very closely with two to just work on the policy, but that was really successful. And that meant that the wording of policies was better, it was more inclusive, there was no more babies handed over on car parks and all of that tripe that you hear. It was far more inclusive now. But there's still more to do. You know, I was only speaking last week on a midwifery NHS England call, which I do them every month to educate midwives. And there's still a lot to know. This isn't getting down to these midwives on the ground, and community midwives even more so. So I'm doing a lot of work with NHS England from a maternity education point of view, and sort of trainee midwives, getting to them early, educating them, because as soon as people hear surrogacy, they become afraid, and it's nothing to be afraid of. It's actually, it's low risk if it's done properly, and that's the key point here. It's do this sensibly, choose your professionals wisely, and if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. So, you know, absolutely choose your team very, very carefully, which is something that we picked up at the start of the call.
Yeah, and I think you said at the beginning, surrogacy in the UK in particular is built on trust. And I often speak to intended parents who are looking at surrogacy arrangements abroad because they are so worried that there isn't the framework in place here yet. And they're so worried that people are going to, someone's going to change their mind along the journey. But actually, it's so rare. Like it's not really an issue. I mean, I think there's less than 5 cases, something ridiculous across the whole country. Since it just doesn't happen. No,
and that's what I say. I've known 3 cases now, where intended parents have walked away from a pregnant surrogate. And intended parents don't think about that. But as a surrogate, they trust us to make sure we're going to be there until the end. And I've known 3 instances where that hasn't gone to plan either. So it's not all on the surrogate.
Yeah. And do you think the reforms that we're bringing in, do you think they are, if they are brought in their current form? I mean, as somebody who is, so embedded now within the surrogacy world, do you think they go far enough, or would you have liked to have seen something else within those reforms?
I don't think they go far enough. It's a real pity that they don't address the international space, especially the US and Canada, because that model is so watertight and incredibly safe. I think classing US and Canada in the same conversation as somewhere like Ukraine or Georgia are 2 very different conversations. And I understand why people go to one over the other. I'm certainly not judging, but it's a fact that the US and Canada is far safer and runs a lot smoother because of the birth orders of the way that model runs. So I'm disappointed that wasn't included in the new pathway, because it's just additional expense and time that intended parents have to go through. There's a few elements that was in the consultation that, I thought was a bit meek, but for us, surrogates and intended parents, it's that parental responsibility from birth, which is the biggie. I do have concerns about independent surrogacy and the future of that, because it's very clear the Law Commission are focusing on RSOs and fertility clinics. And if you are doing traditional surrogacy, or you're not using an organisation, then potentially you will revert to the current pathway. And that can be anything, as you said, from 3 to 6 to 12 months, depending on how complex that looks. And that's also nerve-wracking for IPs. So I think there's a question mark about the independent space too. And I don't think that's been tackled particularly well either.
Yeah, I agree. I think certainly the USA and Canada, I agree with you, it's such a great shame, particularly because I worry that people fall through the gap, and then it only becomes apparent that they should have applied for a parental order because they have a birth certificate with their names on, and they have court orders and all the rest of it from those countries. Sometimes they just don't know. that they also have to do something in this country. And actually that's where we find it's only when something goes wrong later down the line, there might be divorce or separation or something suddenly happens and triggers, and then we look back and suddenly it becomes apparent that actually they're not the legal parents in this country. And it is a great shame, because you have that paperwork, you can completely understand why somebody would think, well, I've got a court order, I've got a birth certificate with my name on it, why would I need to do anything else? And unless they do research in this country, they would have no knowledge of the fact that they still have to go through a whole separate set of, and the clients just come to me and they're just like, I just don't get it. Why?
Yeah,
why
I
do
agree.
I have to do that?
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Awesome. Everybody needs a lawyer in the end. It's a pain, isn't it?
They do indeed.
Anyway, I really enjoyed tonight's session. Thank you very much. I'd like to do it again if we can do it, possibly later on in the year, maybe when the reforms are through and the procedure's different. Obviously, that'd be really helpful. It's been awesome. Thank you very much. Now, Michael, I was just going to ask you one final question. Can you remind me of the date for the next London show, the Modern Family Show?
Of course, thank you. It is the 10th of September, and that's taking place in London, just off Trafalgar Square at number 8, Northumberland. And you can get tickets for that at themodernfamilyshow.com.
Okay, awesome. Lovely. We might see you there. So guys, you've got the details of that. There'll be lots of interesting people to meet to carry on this discussion. Obviously there. You know where we are. Kate's going to do the follow-up email with the information on, so you've got our contact details. No technical questions on surrogacy from me, please. I don't need to answer difficult questions when I've got Gemma and Lisa here for me, and they're the experts. So let us have all your queries and we'll do our best. Michael, thank you very much for your time. We do appreciate it. I would love to see you hopefully later on in the year. I loved seeing the pictures of Tallulah and Duke. I just love this. It's great. Do you think I can do a change of direction in the law? Fabulous. Right. I don't think I'll be allowed to do that. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us tonight. As I say, the next Stowe Talks is the 20th of July. We are going back to slightly more familiar territory. It's going to be dealing with a toxic ex-partner and post-separation abuse. Totally understand if people were here for surrogacy tonight and we're not going to see them next month, but hopefully we'll see you again for surrogacy again in the future. We'll sign off now, but thank you very much. I'm off for a large glass of wine. I suspect Kate's going to be as well. And we'll see you all soon. Lovely to meet you, Michael.
Thanks ever so much. Take care.